When do you play by the rules? And when do you need to write your own in order to fight for the change that you believe in? I faced that dilemma very early on in my career, in the summer of 1993, when I was assigned to one of the smallest U.S. embassies in the world, the American Embassy in Kigali, Rwanda. I was a 26-year-old Save the World Foreign Service officer. I was so excited when I landed in Rwanda. I was actually going to get the chance to make a difference in the world. I was going to help implement the Arusha Peace Accords in a country in East Africa that had been torn apart by ethnic violence between the Hutu and the Tutsis. The peace accords were supposed to end the fighting and eliminate the need for a DMZ. It was supposed to bring the Hutu and the Tutsi together in a united, peaceful, and democratic Rwanda. Stepping off the plane in Kigali that summer, I never could have imagined that rather than helping to implement a peace, I'd actually become a first-hand witness to genocide and watch as the world stood by and we let almost 1 million people die in 3 months' time. My job at the embassy was quite literally the everything else officer. I was responsible for consular affairs and economic affairs. I was even the military security assistance officer. Our embassy, it was so small, we didn't even have any U.S. Marines to protect and defend the embassy. But you know what? It didn't bother me. I actually brought my own. My wonderful, handsome, newlywed husband, Greg, who'd just gotten out of the Marine Corps. In addition to making sure that I knew where every single American lived across Rwanda as the consular officer, I spent most of my time going back and forth across the DMZ, meeting with the rebels and the Rwandan army, trying to bring them together on a more human level so they'd see each other as more as friends than as enemies. Not an easy task. As you can imagine, both sides weren't too impressed by the fact that the U.S. government had sent me, a 20-something woman with no military experience whatsoever, to work with them and serve as the liaison with the rebel force commander, then General Kagame, the Tutsi leader. I spent the next 8 months trying to earn their trust and respect. I even baked brownies and banana bread just so that they look forward to seeing me sometimes. And you know what? I became really good friends with them. And together, we actually thought that we could forge this lasting peace until that day in April. April 6th, 1994, when President Habyarimana's plane was shot down and genocide became the new reality. The first 24 hours and the days that followed would be life-changing for me. I would face 4 of the biggest dilemmas of my entire life. That first dilemma came very quickly on that first night. Do I wait for orders from my chain of command, or do I just go do what I know needs to be done? Because I was the consular officer, it was my responsibility to activate the radio network and communicate with all of the Americans across the country over the radio about what they needed to do to stay safe. I remember on one of the communications, the ambassador actually came on and said, "We're all in God's hands now." I've always been in God's hands. It's what I do when I'm in them that matters. And I remember thinking, in times like this, I don't think protocol really matters. And I turned and looked to Greg and I said, "Honey, you know what? You and I have the best chances of anyone making it to the embassy. We have to figure out a way to get there and then figure out what we're going to do next." So I made my next calls to my rebel and my Rwandan army friends, and I begged them. I said, "You have to find a way to get me safe passage to the embassy." And then I called my family back home, back in the States, to say goodbye. On one of those calls, I actually got my dad's answering machine. And I went, Really, Dad? At a time like this, you can't answer the phone? Thankfully, my liaison officers, they called me back. My dear Rwandan army friend, Ephraim, he said, "Don't worry, Miss Laura. My men will not fire on you, but you have to move now." So Greg and I, we took our dog, our wedding album, our passports, some money, our guns, and very little else. And we got into our red Isuzu Trooper, and we moved through the lines of fighting to get to the embassy. And once there, we opened the radio network to start talking to all of the Americans, and we opened 2 lines of phone communication, one with the State Department and one with the U.S. European Military Command. And I thought, okay, I'm ready. Give me the orders. I'm ready to execute. Initially, they said, tell everyone to stay inside and stay safe. But by the 3rd day, they said, start evacuating all non-essential personnel and all Americans out of the country. My orders were crystal clear. I was responsible for making sure that all 267 Americans made it out alive. Over the course of the evacuation efforts, I'd faced my second big dilemma. Over the radio network, we heard that the Presidential Guard had stopped one of our convoys. They were searching it for suspected Tutsis, and they were harassing one of our African American women. I remember grabbing my radio and running down the street to where the convoy was stopped. Now, mind you, I was not exactly the site of commanding power and presence, because I was wearing what I was wearing when Ephraim had called and said, "Laura, you have to leave your house now." So I was wearing red sweatpants and my favorite Mickey Mouse sweatshirt. You know what? I didn't care. I mustered all of my courage, and I looked that Presidential Guard in the eye, the one that was in charge, and I said, "I don't have time for this. I have a deal with your force commander that no American convoy is going to be stopped, and this convoy is going to be going through." Now, I'm not exactly one to challenge authority, especially not the kind with a shotgun in my face, but this was one of those times where I just was not backing down. I waved all 62 of the cars in that convoy past until the very last one had gone. I looked that guard back in the eye and I said, "Don't stop another one of my convoys again." I then walked back to the embassy. Okay, I'll admit it, that was not the smartest thing to have done, because that Presidential Guard or any one of the contingent or any one of the snipers along the rooftops of that street, they could have taken me out. When I got back to the embassy, Greg said, "Don't you ever do that again." You know what? Looking back, I'd so do that again. Over the next 2 days, we'd actually get every single American out alive except one. My dear friend Carl. Carl Wilkins was the one American missionary who refused to leave, and he stayed behind to help all those that he could. And you know what? He lived to tell about it. On that 4th day, I faced another dilemma. Word had spread through Kigali that the Americans were leaving. Rwandans started to flock to the evacuation points and to the embassy, begging for help. The State Department gave me very clear instructions. They said, "Laura, your job is to evacuate out American citizens and assist foreign passport holders out of the country, not Rwandans." I remember thinking, what am I going to do? If I don't follow orders, my career is over. I will never be ambassador to anywhere. But I could not condemn these people to die. I had to do something. Now, I've never believed that anyone should ever be above the law. In fact, I'd taken an oath as a Foreign Service officer to faithfully execute and implement the laws of the United States of America, including the passport and immigration laws. So I did the only thing that I could think of. I issued countless transportation letters on State Department letterhead, and they read, The bearer of this letter is protected by the US government and part of the American convoys. I made anyone asking for help an honorary American. On the fifth and final day, I faced my final dilemma. The White House and the State Department ordered us to shut down the embassy. And I remember arguing over the phone. We have to keep the embassy open. We can't let the Rwandans think that we're abandoning them. But there was no negotiation. And I remember totally second-guessing myself. I thought, what do I know? I'm just the junior officer. I'm no foreign policy or military expert. And this is the President of the United States of America saying we have to shut down the embassy. And so we did. But crazy as it may sound, I wrote handwritten notes and left them on the desks of every one of my Rwandan staff. And I said, I promise you, I will be back. Greg and I were in the last car and the last convoy out on that final day, the American embassy flag trailing behind our Isuzu trooper. It would take me a full 3 months before the State Department would let me return, but I kept my promise. But when I got back, I faced the awful reality that almost every one of my Rwandan staff had been killed in the early days of fighting. They'd never read any of the notes on my desks or their desks. They'd been on the lists to be killed because they'd worked alongside me and the American government to implement the peace. I remember thinking, what if I just refused and I'd stayed back with Carl? What if I'd been smarter and better at arguing why we needed to keep the embassy open? What if we'd convinced the UN to strengthen their security forces on the ground? What if I just challenged it all and challenged all of their rules? I so should have. This whole experience has taught me I never want to live my life with what ifs ever again. I've lived every day since then with the deepest regret that I didn't do more to save more lives. But I've learned that if I want to be the change that I want to see in this world, yes, I should follow the established order and follow all of its rules and be a great advocate for change from within. But there are going to be times when the regret is going to be so great that I haven't done even more. Then I need to muster all of my courage. I need to follow my heart. And then write my own rules. Thank you.